I'm glad to be back here. I have friends here, and I love coming to this congregation. About 170 years ago, America was deeply divided. It was a decade before the Civil War broke out. And in the middle of that decade, the great American poet Walt Whitman published the first edition of his book, The Leaves of Grass, poems about America. And these are words from the preface to the first collection of Leaves of Grass. It was published in 1855, and 5 years later, the Civil War broke out. And if these words had been embraced, there wouldn't have been a war. Walt Whitman. This is what you shall do. Love the earth and sun and the animals. Despise riches. Give alms to everyone that asks. Stand up for the stupid and crazy. Devote your income and labor to others. Hate tyrants. Argue not concerning God. Have patience and indulgence toward the people. Take off your hat to nothing known or unknown, or to any man or number of men. Go freely with powerful, uneducated persons and with the young, and with the mothers of families. Read these leaves in the open air, every season of every year of your life. Re-examine all you have been told at school or church or in any book. Dismiss whatever insults your own soul. I lost my place. It's not over. And your very flesh shall be a great poem and have the richest fluency, not only in its words, but in the silent lines of its lips and face, and between the lashes of your eyes, and in every motion and joint of your body. Walt Whitman. You want to see what's in there? You can get open? There you go. All right. So it's a notebook. That's not very exciting. But the notebook has pictures in it. And I'm going to tell you a story about one person in particular. And the story really is about how you become an American. And I think the grown-ups in the room have been thinking a lot about this lately. They've had a reason to. Well, a long time ago, in a town, in a place called Persia, it's now called Iran. They changed the name some while ago. Country called Persia, in a town, there were about 200 families who lived there, and they were all Assyrians. That was a particular tribe of people, very old tribe. They'd been around for thousands of years. And there was a war going on, and the people in that village were in danger because the people fighting the war wanted their village. They wanted their land. So they tried to force them out. So there was a family there who had several children, and one of them was named Samuel, and Samuel is the one I'm telling you about. He was 18 years old. That's how old you are when you're finishing high school. So he was a boy, 18 years old, Samuel. And the family was very afraid because of this war and the danger they were in. So they decided they would send Samuel across the ocean to America, because in America, they learned there was no war going on and that they could start a new life there and be safe. Well, they didn't have much money. Samuel's father was a farmer. But they little money they had, they scraped together and they gave it to Samuel. But they didn't have enough money for his whole trip there. So they also gave him a roll of Persian carpets, several rugs, small rugs. And when he ran out of money, he could peel one of those rugs off and sell it and get money. So first of all, to get to where he was going to take a ship to America, he had to go over some mountains. And of course, there were no roads and there were no cars. So he rented a camel and he took the camel for a while, and then he had to give it back to the owner of the camel. And then he rented horses. And finally he got across the mountains and he got to where the ship was, but he had spent all of his money on camels and horses. So he had to peel off several carpets to buy a ticket to come to America. And he'd always wanted to be a doctor. That was his goal in life. He was going to come to America, become a doctor, make a safe place, and then all of his family would come after him. But in order to become a doctor, he had to go to high school again. He had gone to high school in Persia. He spoke 5 languages, could read 5 languages, and he spoke several of them. But he had to go to high school in English to be allowed to go to medical school. So he did that in New York City. And he worked to earn money while he was going to high school by helping to dig tunnels under a river that now have subways running through it. So he got his high school degree. He moved to Chicago, studied medicine, and became a doctor. I want to show you some pictures. That's the family he came from in Persia. He's not in that picture. The man that you see in that picture is his brother, and the others are his sisters, and one of them is his mother. And when he finished medical school, he got a white gown to wear. If you've ever been to a doctor, some doctors wear white coats. They don't all, but some do. And when he graduated from medical school in Chicago, he got a white coat, and that's what he's wearing. Well, after he was in America for 5 years, he applied to become a citizen. That is, someone who has all the rights that any other American has, including to vote. And this is a copy of his citizenship certificate. Oops. And then he got married, and he had 3 children. And you can see one of those children is a girl, and her name's Eva. The boys are Norman and Marshall. So Samuel has 3 children. And Eva grew up and fell in love with a farm boy from Mississippi. That's the farm boy she's hugging there. And Eva and the farm boy got married. That's their marriage picture. And pretty soon, Eva had a baby. That's the baby, first baby. Her name is Sandra. And then a second baby came along. You can see there's a little boy, and then that's Sandra, just a little bit older. And the little boy got a little bigger. And there he is with his dad, the Mississippi farm boy. And there he is with Samuel. So that's Samuel. Samuel's the grandfather of this little boy. And there's a picture of the boy a little bit older with his favorite dog, Rusty. Now here's the puzzle. Who's that boy? Do you know who that boy is? Who do you think? It's me. Oh, okay. Now you look at me, this white beard, this old bald guy. I was a child once. In fact, I was a baby once. In fact, I wasn't even in the world once. But because my grandfather came from another country and earned his citizenship, he became an American, which meant that when his children were born, my mother among them, they were American. And because my mother was American, I'm an American. And you know, most people who live in America today either were born in another country, or their mom or dad was born in another country, or their grandparents were born in another country. And if you go back far enough, everybody who lives now in the United States is a descendant of someone who came from another country. And that includes the so-called indigenous peoples who came from Asia a long time ago. So who becomes an American, or how do you become American? There are lots of ways to do it, but right now there's a big struggle in America about who has the right to be American. And if that man, Samuel, had not been allowed to come to America and make a life and be a doctor and help patients for 55 years in Chicago, I would not be an American today. That's it.
Last week, I joined 24 Unitarian Universalist ministers for the 74th meeting of the Prairie Group. According to the legend of the Bard, yes, there is an official bard that keeps the oral history of the gathering alive. Quote, "The Prairie Group was summoned into being on the banks of the confluence of the Mississippi, Illinois, and Missouri rivers in the year 1951 by 4 wise servants of the liberal church: James Luther Adams, Max Gabler, Leslie Pennington, and Thad Clark sought to preserve the heritage of the scholarly ministry and nurture the life of the mind among Unitarian clergy serving on the sometimes isolating stretches of the Midwest prairie." And so we did gather. We gathered, sang, shared, and learned. This year we wept. This year's topic was speculative fiction, and boy howdy, was that a timely topic for the somewhat apocalyptic Orwellian nightmare it feels like we are living in at times. One of the papers that was presented was more of a prayer book based on various books and short stories, speculative fiction, that we read. Very compelling, moving, and we got to explore this resource and how we might use it through 5 different stations of interactive spiritual practice. One of these was a tea ceremony where one would be asked what they needed, which would be both related to tea and life, and to be served tea. And in that act of hospitality and conversation, one could, if they wish, just sit and enjoy, perhaps read or meditate as they contemplated what is next. For the record, this tea ceremony was related to a great short book, a relatively new short book of speculative fiction called A Psalm for the Wild Built. I highly recommend it. A Psalm for the Wild Built. I digress. While I was drinking my tea, I began reading one of the pages of the prayer book that was made for each of us. I was drawn to one page titled A Few Seeds, which ends with this contemplative question, which I pondered in that moment. The question was this: if the seed is today and the sprout is tomorrow, what is the burning bush? What is the beacon set ablaze by God that does not burn the living plant, yet lights our way into the future? End quote. That was a very stimulating question for me, since my very first tattoo is one of the burning bush, which I literally got marked for my ordination, to mark my ordination and installation to be the called, settled minister of this community 7 years ago, just November 12th, 2017. But I was also struck by the rewinding of time of the life of the burning bush that gets all the attention. The burning bush gets the attention if you're referring to this story in Exodus. And considering when and where and how we find ourselves in this life or in this journey here at UCCI or in this time in Indiana or in this unfolding life of this nation or of our democracy, at what stage of life are we? If the seed is today and the sprout is tomorrow, when is the burning bush? What is the beacon set ablaze by God that does not burn the living plant, yet lights our way into the future? When Scott and I spoke a few days ago and he shared he wanted to speak on the subject of trees, this still living vision of the seed, that sprout and that bush, and a fiery miracle came to mind. He believes, as I do, that some things are worth fighting for, that our democracy, our values, even the trees themselves require our courageous action and resilient love if we are to win and see tomorrow. So I began thinking about the work we do here as we say we celebrate love and work for justice. I was thinking about the last Sunday service this last week on Pete Seeger and how long we have been fighting for justice and striving for liberation for all. I started thinking about the labor of love that is community and the act of faith that is planting a seed. For both of these, the love of community and the seed of faith, take time to mature and grow, transform and stretch beyond what is fathomable to become something awesome and new. But that work of fighting for democracy, fostering community, or watching a tree grow from seed requires patience and resilience that is hard when, as mentioned earlier, we are living in a time that can feel stranger than fiction. For those of you who do not know, one of my favorite idioms is the one about the tree that falls in the forest. You know, it goes, if a tree falls in the forest and no one is around to see it, does it make a sound? So in meetings, I tend to editorialize or improvise alternative endings to try, I hope, to articulate some sort of point. Last week, when I was sipping tea at Prairie Group, I came up with a few alternatives and I just wanted to share them, see what you think. If a seed is planted in the forest and its fate is unknown, was it worth planting? If a seed is planted in the forest and no one is around to see it, will it still offer shade one day? If a tree was once planted in the forest and it has now fallen, what sound do we make when we see it? And if a tree falls in the forest and it returns to the earth, how does the earth respond upon receiving it? I think we are all called to defend the trees of our lives. What those trees are metaphors for will be different for each one of us. But if we can commit to the planting, the tending, and the defending that which is most precious to us, I believe we can and will continue to be a people who are collectively a beacon of love and light, of pluralism and courage and justice, and most certainly, love. May it be so, and amen.
As it happens, I've thought about Pete Seeger lately, given the current state of our country and world. Late in his life, he was interviewed, and I was watching this interview, and the interviewer was a great admirer and very sympathetic with everything he had done in his life. And she said, well, Pete, you must be discouraged because you're a champion of labor unions and labor unions have been crushed, and champion of peace, and there's war everywhere, and everything that you've advocated throughout your life is worse off now than before you started. And he leaned back and he said, "You're right. You're right. The earth's going to hell in a handbasket and everything's just going to get worse. But I keep singing because I might be wrong." And we all got to keep singing, all of us, in all of our different ways that we sing. Well, for years, I've written about some hard, dark subjects: war, racism, sexism, environmental degradation, things that are on minds and hearts of people in this room, I'm sure. And every once in a while, I would take a break from that writing, which shows up in my essays, and I would visit a family, a fictional family named Mills, who live in a fictional town in southern Indiana called Limestone. And Limestone, Indiana is so obscure, it doesn't even show up on maps. And map makers disagree over where it's located. I revisit that town and I revisit a family, the Mills family. Husband and wife are Gordon and Mabel. Gordon works for the city maintenance department. He's a working class guy, started work, dropped out of high school at 16 and started work. And Mabel is a tough cookie. They have 4 kids. You'll meet the 4 kids: an elementary school kid, a middle school kid, a high school kid, and a college kid. And 3 grandparents alive. Gordon's father died in a quarry accident. So there are 9 of them, all under one roof, which falls apart about as fast as Gordon can fix it. So that's the Mills family. And this is a story from a book about them, A Year in Their Life, a book called Small Marvels. I emphasize the V because some people get marbles out of that. It's really small wonders. And in Limestone, Indiana, strange things happen, but nobody notices that they're strange. So this is called Trees. To celebrate the birth of his first child, Gordon Mills planted a tree in the yard, and he did the same when his other 3 children were born. For Jeannie, the first of them, it was a sugar maple. For Bruce, who came along next, it was a red oak. For his 3rd child, Veronica, he planted a sycamore. And for Danny, last of all, he planted a tulip tree. After Danny's birth, Mabel declared herself retired from the baby-making business, and her word was law on such matters, on most other matters, if truth be told. The sugar maple soon formed a canopy shaped like an egg, rounded at the top and bottom and neatly tapering along the sides, and it turned scarlet in the fall. And in sympathy with her maple tree, Jeannie grew up to appear tidy and composed on the outside, but her red hair revealed a fiery interior. The oak leaves turned the color of rubies for a spell in the fall, as if they had been hiding jewels all summer. But then they sobered up to brown and clung to the tree all winter, clattering in the breeze. Like his oak tree, Bruce was sturdy and secretive, allowing flashes of brilliance to show through every once in a while with a wisecrack or an invention, and then retreating behind a mop of brown hair that nearly covered his eyes. By contrast, Veronica dramatized her moods. The way her sycamore flung out its branches and flaunted its bark, a crazy quilt of light and dark patches, and her long hair was as black as a crow's wing. Like her tree, she loved water, opened her arms to every sort of animal, and gleamed in the sunlight. Danny grew up as straight and fast as the tulip tree, which he began climbing soon after he learned to walk, and which he continued climbing in spite of having tumbled out and broken his arm, a mishap in keeping with the character of the tree, whose limbs often cracked in high winds. Like the tulip tree, he mended quickly and kept sprouting skyward with eyes as green as any spring leaf and hair as golden as any leaf in fall. Given these resemblances, it wasn't surprising that all four children became fierce defenders of trees. They made sure every piece of cardboard and scrap of paper in the Mills household was recycled. They joined picket lines outside local building supply stores that bought lumber from old growth forests. They wrote letters to the president and the governor, protesting clear cuts in the state and national forests. With money from their allowance and later on with earnings from odd jobs, they sponsored the planting of trees in the Amazon, in Africa, and across America. They showed up at every Arbor Day celebration with shovels, eager to nestle roots into the ground. Jeannie called herself a tree hugger in honor of those women in India who wrapped their arms around trees to prevent loggers from felling the village forests. Bruce identified with the Druids, sporting a long robe and carrying a staff in ceremonial occasions, and trying his best to grow a beard. Veronica fancied herself a wood sprite, which gave her the opportunity of wearing flowers in her hair, frilly dresses, and gauzy wings. And little Danny wished he could take a break from being a kid and become a tree. Not forever, just long enough to root his legs in the ground, feel squirrels scampering up his ribs, and hear birds singing in his hair. So you can imagine how riled up the Mills children became when the mayor of Limestone announced plans to clear a grove of trees from a city park to allow for expansion of the jail. Jeannie circulated a petition against the plan at the college where she was studying biology and art history. Bruce took the petition to the high school, Veronica to the middle school, and Danny to the elementary school. At first, the teachers thought this would be a good way of teaching civic responsibility, but the movement soon got out of hand. Before long, children were pestering school principals to sign the petition and badgering their parents to call the mayor. They filled their classrooms with tree posters. They plastered shop windows with signs proclaiming "Grow forests, not prisons." And they flooded the newspaper with letters. Instead of enlarging the jail, the letters argued, why not arrest fewer people? Or if a bigger jail really was necessary, why not expand in the other direction over the parking lot? It would do good for the paunchy deputies to walk a few blocks to reach their squad cars, the letters pointed out. Besides, it was a well-established fact that patients in hospitals healed faster if they could look out on a bit of nature. So wouldn't sight of that forest help rehabilitate prisoners? All across the city, dinner tables, conversations kept circling back to the endangered grove of trees. Meanwhile, dressed in his Druid's outfit, Bruce pitched a tent in the park and made himself at home. Wearing her wood sprite getup, complete with wings, Veronica wove pink yarn in and out among the trees, forming a delicate web and tying a bow around each trunk. Jeannie brought a contingent of biology students to erect banners documenting the ecological benefits of forests. Danny clambered high into the branches where he conversed with the birds and studied clouds. Before the police could shoo them away, dozens of other kids showed up with tarps and tents and sleeping bags, So the chief of police issued a warning and called the mayor, who was up for re-election in a couple of months. Better let them have their fun, the mayor advised. They'll go running home as soon as it rains. But the children didn't flee when it rained. Instead, night by night, the encampment grew. School bus drivers adjusted their routes so they could pick up students in the morning and drop them there in the afternoon. In the evenings, teachers held tutoring sessions under the trees. Unable to persuade their children to come home, mothers delivered meals and fresh clothes to the forest. Fathers patrolled the park boundary to keep out thugs. To protect the camp during the day while the kids were in school, the grandparents, including the kids' grandparents, set up lawn chairs in the park and chatted with friends who happened by. And soon there were dozens of oldsters lounging about, playing checkers or bridge on card tables, reading books, strumming guitars, and shooting the breeze. Many of them, it turned out, had loved trees in secret all along, but were afraid their friends might find such love excessive. After some weeks of this uproar with no sign of surrender from the protesters, the mayor called the Mills household. Naturally, Gordon, who hated phones, avoided it until he learned that the call was for him. Mr. Mills, the mayor began, I understand your children started all this trouble. I also understand you're a valued employee in the city maintenance department. Do you like your job? I sure do, Gordon replied. Then I suggest you rein in your offspring and your mother and your wife's parents while you're at it, because I'd hate for the city to lose the services of a dedicated worker like yourself. That night in bed, Gordon talked it over with Mabel. How can you tell them to quit? Mabel said. You set them on this path when you planted those saplings. Besides, the kids are right. Them being right won't keep food on the table if I get fired, Gordon said. If you get fired, I'll go door to door and campaign against the mayor. I'll raise such a stink it will draw vultures to circle over the city jail. Knowing Mabel would do that, and more once she got her dander up, Gordon settled into fitful sleep. At work the next day, the maintenance supervisor told him that word of the mayor's anger had come down from on high. He thinks you're trying to make him look bad before the election, supervisor said. Since I'd have to hire 3 men to replace you, Mills, I'm going to help you solve this little family problem. How? Gordon said. As soon as the kids go off to school, I'm going to send you with a crew to clean up the park. There'll be a dozen cops there on hand to roust out the old timers. All you've got to do is tear down the camp and throw everything in the truck and haul it to the dump. Easy as pie. Then the mayor's happy, I'm happy, you're happy, and the city's at peace. Gordon thought for a minute, and then he said, I quit. What do you mean quit, Mills? You can't quit, Mills. Without answering, Gordon picked up his lunchbox and headed for the door. Where are you going, Mills? Supervisor yelled. To see my kids. When Gordon reached the park, he found a ring of policemen surrounding the camp, where the youngsters, skipping school for the day, were huddled in their tents or talking in little clumps or sitting in the branches of trees. Sight of Danny waving from high up in a shagbark hickory tugged Gordon right through the police barricade. He ignored the orders to stop, and when hands grabbed at him, he shook loose and kept going. The police backed off when he was engulfed by a mob of kids, including Bruce the Druid, Veronica the Wood Sprite, and Jeannie the red-haired rebel. Nimble as any squirrel, Danny scurried down the hickory and leapt from the lowest branch into Gordon's arms. While the police muttered into a walkie-talkie, a crowd began to gather from near and far. There were shoppers, joggers, office workers, dog walkers, elderly ramblers, bleary-eyed parents pushing baby buggies, cooks in aprons, carpenters in overalls, monks in robes, yoga enthusiasts in leotards, every sort of person under the sun. Soon, television crews arrived in satellite trucks, newspaper photographers showed up with cameras clicking, reporters began scribbling notes, and political candidates turned out to shake hands and distribute campaign buttons. All of them drawn there by rumors that the mayor was going to make an important announcement in the park at 9 o'clock that morning. The rumors, it so happened, had been set in motion by Mabel, who had called her friends, who had called their friends, who had in turn called their own friends, and so on until almost everyone in the city had heard the news, except the mayor. When the mayor did hear, he decided to assert his authority by showing up at the appointed hour and declaring the camp would be cleared and the trees would be leveled that very day. He fancied himself posing in coat and tie, holding a chainsaw beside a fresh stump, a bold image for the evening news. By the time he arrived, however, the crowd had swelled to fill the sidewalks and streets for a block in every direction. He had to wade through a thicket of placards, a din of chanting, and a swirl of dancing. Only when he reached the police barricade, climbed onto a picnic table, and turned around to face the throng did he fully weigh the fact that every placard praised the trees, every chant celebrated the trees, every dance blessed the trees, and every person there age 18 or older could vote for his opponent in the coming election. My fellow citizens, the mayor began, pausing to absorb these revelations and to allow time for the cameras to click. After careful deliberation, and with due respect for the subtleties of the case, and bearing in mind the great tradition of democracy and the sacrifices of our armed forces, and in my tireless efforts to keep your taxes low, and as an expression, I must add, of my own deep love for God's creation, I have decided, pausing for effect, to spare these magnificent trees. Whatever else he might have said was drowned out by a roar from the crowd. The mayor was staggered by the force of this joy, and he was staggered again when a small but formidable woman clambered up onto the picnic table and thumped him on the back and smacked a crown of leaves onto his head. "You go, Mama," Veronica cried out. For who else could it be but Mabel Mills, beaming there beside the mayor with her gray hair billowing like a storm cloud? She motioned to her kids, who climbed up beside her, their arms lifted like branches, prompting onlookers to think of maples and oaks, sycamores and tulip trees. The crowd cheered, and Gordon cheered loudest of all.
It's like Coco, I'm a fan. And Scott and we planned a longer conversation. Of course, you don't give a reflection to a minister and not expect it to be more like sermon length. So I'm sorry I took up so much time earlier. But I did have one question that maybe could guide us then into our conversations over lunch and other things. And I hope the conversations will continue, because that's the hope. It's like an organizing meeting. And then now we're going to go out and make our placards and our tree, our, pro-tree stuff. But one of the things I've been thinking about lately are three values and how they relate to each other: resilience, courage, and love. And I'm thinking a little bit about it in response to this last month, and how do we cultivate resilience and courage and love for everyone. And especially with our interfaith partners. And when I say interfaith partners, I mean anything beyond the isolatedness of Unitarian Universalism. Because anytime we go up beyond these walls, it's an interfaith encounter. And yet that can be a challenge, you know, to actually get out and start doing the organizing, start believing that something is possible. And I'm just wondering if you have some thoughts or encouragement around ideas of resilience or courage or love as it relates to congregations. Because I think I see a bunch of those 4 kids in adult form in all these people and in our young people. And I just wonder what thoughts you might have around that could encourage us.
Well, one form of ethics is foreseeing outcomes of your actions, and you're motivated by what you predict will happen as a result of your actions. Another form of ethics is to act in ways that are in keeping with your values, regardless of what the outcome might be. So when students come to me and say, well, I ride my bike and fraternity boys at the university drive Hummers, and so what's the point of riding my bike? I said, well, why do you ride the bike? Well, it doesn't burn gas, no greenhouse emissions, exercise, fresh air, easy to park. I said, did any of those reasons go away because the fraternity boy drives a Hummer? In other words, she has reason to behave in a certain way, not because it's guaranteed to change the world. Nothing we do is guaranteed to change the world. She does what she does because of the values that she's trying to embody, the values that she's trying to act out. And so what I get discouraged, of course, but part of my responsibilities as a teacher, writer, parent, grandparent is to uphold the best in the children I work with, as the young people I work with, when I'm a teacher, with my own children and grandchildren, and also implicitly with the people who read my books. That I have a responsibility to articulate, to make clear what it is I value and how that helps to guide my behavior. And I'm not perfect, but I don't guide my behavior by being confident that it's going to change the world. So resilience is a way of being able to remind yourself of what it is you love most deeply, what you care about, and what you imagine it is to be a good person. It's as simple as that. What does it mean to be a good person? And we're not all going to answer that in the same way, but there are overlapping qualities that almost all of us would name. We'd name kindness, generosity, willingness to cooperate with other people, willingness to listen to other people and recognize their needs and not only our own needs. There are a lot of ways in which we would identify with one another's values. So resilience is to remind yourself of what those values are, in spite of the circumstances.
Thank you. And it kind of leaves us with the question we wrote in the order of service, which is sort of what is a value that you would defend in life? It says, what features of your home community do you work to protect and nurture, or will work to protect and nurture? And so we'll have a little transition interlude here, but I hope that can guide us into our lunch and into our lives together, really thinking about these values and believing that something's really powerful and strong when we choose to do that in community rather than in isolation. And so I really want to thank Scott again. I hope you'll thank me now again for him being here today.
Thanks very much.